I'm seeing and experiencing as I travel all over the United States and work with different governments at different levels, and some of the common themes that are emerging, and some of the things that I think are important to start shifting our narrative, shifting our perspective so that we can be more successful in this changing environment. So today's title is United is Greater Than Unanimous. Unanimous decisions used to be the gold standard, but I hate to say it, the world has changed, and now we have to figure out a way in a very divided and divisive tenor of governing to make our way through the struggles that are ever present, but to remain united on the other end. So I'll share with you some of my insights and some of my thoughts, and I hope you'll drop questions in the chat box if you have any. At least it's going to monitor those for me so that we can get to them as quickly as possible. So united is greater than unanimous. See if I can get my screen to work. I apologize. There we go. So for better or worse, local government has changed for any number of reasons. I mean, obviously, the national political environment has changed significantly. I know in Texas, the state environment has changed significantly. And the local government is no different. They are experiencing those changes daily and for sure. And so, we used to think of local government as being insulated from the tides of red and blue, those influences at the state and federal level. But that has changed. We are seeing the influence of those national level issues, those state level issues in the players, the people who are running for office, the policies that those folks are trying to introduce as part of local government, and just the general polarity that exists in the world. I know in my environment, I'm seeing, the Democratic Party is running candidates for nonpartisan offices, or the Republican Party is running their candidates for nonpartisan offices. And one of the beauties of local government had been that it was nonpartisan, that potholes are not red or blue, potholes are potholes. And so we can focus on those issues that affect the everyday life of our constituents. But now with the advent of social media and the pressures of the political climate, we're seeing people that are running for office who have a different type of agenda than just provide services to the folks who live in a community, and are really trying to push higher level issues. But we're also seeing those pressures coming from their constituents. So even when the political elected official is in office and is trying to do what is good for local government, they're still receiving that external pressure to try to bring those red or blue or whatever issues into the fold that may or may not have a foothold in local government. So I think it's important that we start with kind of what is the national tenor? What are we looking at as far as, sort of in a more global framework of what it is we're fighting against? And this, I think, is really a great analogy or a look at what people are saying. And so this comes from the Pew Research Center, and I'll share with you a couple of more slides related to that. But when they asked Americans what their top descriptors of current politics are, these were the words that bubbled up. Obviously, the bigger the word, the more often it occurred in their survey. And this was in 2023, the most recent one that I had access to. But at best, we are looking at a characterization of government in general as being bad or polarized or, dysfunctional or self-centered. But at worst, we have rooted in these words like divisive or corrupt or chaos or messy. And so, just when you think about where local government fits into the stratosphere of government, these are the words that are already coloring people's perceptions. Even though they may have started at the national level, they are now coming home to roost at the local level as well. We're fighting an uphill battle because we are trying to distinguish ourselves as local servants, as being, part of the good guys. We're trying to provide the services and really make a difference in people's lives. And unfortunately, this is kind of what's going on around us and is coloring people's perceptions, even when we're doing good work. I think this is another really interesting statistic that I always like to use when I'm doing governance seminars. And this is what Americans feel about their federal, state, and local government. Basically, whether they feel favorable about it or unfavorable about it. So if we start on the left and we look at the federal government, the unfavorable rating back in 2019, again, 2023 is what we're going to look at, and it was the most recent I could get for these statistics. 66% felt unfavorably about the federal government, where only 32% felt favorably. And that carried forward to 2022, about 3 years later. And then the following year, and you can remember there was the talk of a new election cycle and all of that, but that number had changed drastically by about 10% in both directions. So we're looking at the federal government, people's view of it at being 77% unfavorable at this most recent time, and 22% favorable. That is a massive divide. That is 75-25, 3/4, 1/4. And so we have this general feeling of distrust and or disfavor with federal government. When we move to the state government, they fared a little better, depending on what state you're in. They fared a little better. And in 2019, we had sort of that 60-40 split. 59% felt favorably versus the unfavorable majority in Washington, and 40% felt unfavorable. And in 2022, we got a little closer together. So we're now 54% favorable, 45 unfavorable. And by 2023 in December, we were split 50-50, basically. But then I want to turn your attention to the right-hand side, which is local government. And if you look at the numbers and the split between favorable and unfavorable, in August of 2019, it was the exact opposite of the federal feeling. So we were 69% favorable in local government with only 29% unfavorable, 70-30, if you will. And then there had been a bit of a slide by about 3% and both directions in 2022. So we're now at sort of a third and 2/3, still 2/3, a strong majority of people feeling more favorable about their local government than unfavorable. But by 2023, we've seen more of a decline. So now we are seeing a 61% versus a 37% unfavorable. So still a majority, a pretty strong majority, but we're seeing the decline. And that should be concerning to all of us. And why is that? I would tell you that it is when you're seeing what's happening at the national and state level, that influence is carrying forward at the local level right now with people's just general distrust or disfavor with government as an institution. So let's take a little bit closer look to local government. And here is the comparison of favorable and unfavorable, favorable, with local government being the top line and federal government being the bottom line. And we're seeing a similar trend. So it's sort of trending in the same direction, maybe not quite as steep a decline at the local level just yet. But I think it's something we should all be concerned about. We should all be thinking about, why is this happening? How do we insulate ourselves from the national narrative? And what can we do to really demonstrate our value to our communities in a way, considering that this is the environment that we find ourselves in today. So how do we curb our downward slide? So as I showed you the statistics, and the new ones hopefully will come out here before too much longer, but I fear that it's still a downward trajectory. But how do we as local governors manage to ward off that feeling of distrust, disillusionment, anger, frustration, whatever those descriptors are, at our local level, and still demonstrate the value that we provide to our local communities every day? So here are some of my thoughts. We have to adjust our expectations and our approach. That's number one. If we look back at those statistics originally, at best, we're looking at a 2/3, 1/3 split on pretty much every issue that we're dealing with. So you change someone's trash, you're going to have 30% of people who feel one way and 60% who feel another. We decide on a public safety policy. We're going to have a divide. What we have to do is figure out that the divide is just part of the natural environment that we find ourselves in today. So maybe our expectations of 100% every time are a little unrealistic. So, but that doesn't mean we give up the fight, right? So how do we change our approach in a way that's going to demonstrate that local value in a way that differentiates us from the federal or state level discord? So I just think this is sort of, I think, where we should start, and the idea of unanimous. So when I was coming up in my 20 years in local government, unanimous was the gold standard. That's what we were all chasing. That's what we all wanted. We defined it, the public defined it, we thought, as staffers, that it looked like we as a unit, as the team, as the city council or city government and the staff were working together. That the public saw it as we had studied the issues and had all arrived at the same solution and were willing to raise our hands in favor unanimously. That it was a unified agenda, that we were all sort of moving in the same direction, that we were trying to push forward what we thought was the right direction for the community, and that if we could remain unified in that way, we could move forward in a more expedient manner. We thought that people thought, oh, that's a successful council. A unanimous vote looks like a successful council. I worked with a city in Texas where they had a mayor and council who had been together for 4 or 5, 6 years. And their mark or hallmark, they believed, of success was that they had unanimous votes. So they worked issues until they could get to a unanimous vote. And a new person got elected who had not come up with that group. And his belief was that unanimous seemed suspect. And so he wanted to throw sort of the wrench in the wheel. And no matter how much information or how many questions were answered or how deliberated the issue was, he oftentimes just wanted to vote no, because that was just the perspective he came from. And that mayor took it personally, very personally, and was very frustrated and thought that that looked like a divided council and that they were not successful. But that's not what the public necessarily is expecting anymore. They want to see some of the push and pull. So it's not necessarily the same as it always was, where we think, okay, a unanimous vote means we're the best council going. But the public also, we believed, thought that meant that they thought the council was doing what they believed was best, that we all had the same idea of what best was, and that we were all willing to get to a point where we could support whatever the solution was. But unanimous is, and you see the graphic up in the top, the rubber stamp. So I hear so often in unanimous votes, particularly on controversial issues and even some non-controversial, oh, it was a done deal. These are all things that I'm sure you've heard before. They're all in cahoots with the developer. They've been paid under the table. They had meetings behind our backs. There's some hidden agenda. This is part of some bigger conspiracy where they're trying to walk us down a direction slowly rather than tell us what the eventual end is. Or they're all alike. If everybody always votes the same, then is there really a dissenting opinion, or is there really much deliberation or debate? And ultimately, they don't care what we think. So a unanimous decision about a controversial zoning issue where there was an applicant who stood up and said, this is great, and a homeowner who was at an adjacent property who said this is terrible, a unanimous vote is going to look different to both of those parties. And so, unanimous, where it was the thing that we all chased, is it really what the public wants or desires at this point, or does it make them more suspicious of the system as a whole? So let's talk about, united versus unanimous. So unanimous meaning, okay, everybody raises their hand in the same way, but united meaning that we can stay a team, we can stay a unit, even when we're divided on issues. So is it possible that, we can stay on the same team and chase different goals? Can we disagree without being disagreeable? Can we be on the losing side and still honor the decision? And can we still honor the principles of good governance? And I think that's where we have to go back to that foundation of good governance to find some of our answers, because the answer to all of these questions is yes, but it's a deliberate act, and it's something that we have to work as a team, as a unit, to understand we all have a part. We were all here. We are all in our positions for a reason. All of our positions have whatever degree of power they have. And sometimes we win and sometimes we lose. But if the team can remain united at the other end of that, that is going to be the most successful strategy to keep the wheels in motion and to keep moving forward and to keep some of the controversy and cynicism at bay. So let's start with some of these principles of good governance. We do workshops all the time that include some of these things, but I want to talk specifically about what I'm seeing and some of the strong strategies that I see employed with cities that are able to manage controversial issues or controversial environments, but still remain unified in a way that is, advantageous to the long-term agenda, but then also to the organization and its future. So the very first thing, and the thing that I find lacking in so many places that I visit, is governing standards. So we went through this process in the city that I worked for, where we really just had, the charter. The charter said the mayor does this, the council does this, the staff does this. And then we use Robert's Rules of Order, which those are great for managing meetings, but there is a lot more that happens in the governance realm than just running of meetings. And so I find that cities that take the time to adopt strong governing standards that talk about not just, how we're going to do business in a meeting, but how things actually work. Who has the ultimate authority for this? What do we expect of the mayor as the spokesperson? Who's allowed to issue proclamations? That one comes up a lot as of late. Or what duties have we delegated specifically to a city manager or city administrator? How do we handle public meetings in a way that is, maintains decorum to the best level? How do we interact and engage with staff members? A lot of times we have spoken policies and we may have a piece here and there, but we don't actually have a really robust governing standards document that sort of covers from start to finish. This is how we as a government want to do business. And if we internally don't have that strong governing standards policy or pieces of, procedures, if we don't have those clearly defined, how do we teach that next council person or that next staffer that comes in that this is the way we do business? How do we also point back to something and say, this is why we did it this way, or this is how you, the public, can engage, and this is what you can and cannot do when it comes to, showing up at a public hearing or this, that, or the other. I've seen those documents that are 2 pages, and I have seen those documents that are 40 pages. Again, every city is different, but I think that when we start with that as the foundational piece, it gives us the training tool for that next generation of council people who come in to see this is how we do business and this is our culture. But more importantly, it teaches the public the process. If we have a lot of standards and things that we're doing internally, but we don't have them written in black and white somewhere, it's very easy for the public to question it. So let's take, for example, a mayor is having a controversial public hearing, and we have 20 people who have stood up to speak, and a person comes up who may be elderly and is taking their time getting through their statement, and it's a pro whatever issue statement. And so the mayor extends, I'll give you an extra minute because, I'm being gracious because you need a little bit more time. But then the very next person stands up and they're held to the strong 3-minute rule. That right there tells the public that there are different rules for different people. Not meaning to be malicious, not meaning to do anything untoward, but the public starts to see these fractures, and that is where they start to believe that there are winners and losers. So if we can teach the public this is the process. If we print it on agendas, this is how it goes. This is what's accepted. This is what's not. Not only does it empower the mayor or the meeting manager and the council to help maintain decorum, but it also helps the public to understand where their part is and how they can play in their role in the governing system. If we don't have those things written down, it's left to suspicion. And oftentimes governments who are doing it well don't do this because they're doing it well, right? But what happens when that no voter comes in, or what happens when that controversial issue stands up? We want to prepare ourselves before the wave crashes, rather than as the wave is crashing. But ultimately, it's to maintain decorum. we're seeing this incivility happening at the state level, at the federal level, on TV all the time. It's become the louder you speak, or the more animated you become, or the more controversial you behave, the more your point matters. Well, in our world, maintaining decorum is the way that we manage meetings. It's the way we get through issues. It's the way we make sure everyone gets heard. And so having that strong system in place that says, okay, this is how we maintain decorum. It's not applied to this person or that person disparately. This is how we do business. It enables the council members, as well as the mayor, as well as the staff and attorneys and whoever are involved in the process, to have the tools and to have the thing to point to, rather than it looking like they're being draconian with the rules because they don't like what the person is saying. Another thing that I think that enough time isn't spent doing these days is building camaraderie amongst the council and the staff. I work with a lot of cities that do retreats. And those retreats are intended to be off-site. They are intended to not have specific issues that are being deliberated. They are really intended to get to understand how the other members think, what the other members' pressures are, what their frustrations are, what their hopes are. And really talk big picture about what is plaguing the system, rather than being in this very confined environment at a council meeting or something, or a workshop where there's an expected decision coming, where there's a pressure being applied. This sort of releases that pressure and allows people to understand differing perspectives, differing agendas, differing needs for information or for deliberation. But also it helps us stop making assumptions, because I can tell you the thing that I deal with most in councils that are having struggles, and that includes councils and staffs, is that we have a lot of assumptions and we've not had a lot of conversations. And so I encourage this idea of really trying to take the moment to get away from the deliberative process. And the laws of open records and open meetings really, kind of tie people's hands to a degree, and they feel like, I don't know if I can or I can't talk. So having a structured time every year or every other year or a couple of times a year to just have those conversations, to sort of build those relationships and to break down the assumptions that may be clouding our judgment of other people is really important. The more I know about you and the more I trust that you are here because you want what's best, and the more I can trust that you're doing what you think is best and not someone's specific or personal agenda, the more I'm going to be able to agree with you, be agreeable with you, even when we disagree on issues. So this, building a system that allows us to agree to disagree, and practicing that and building the relationships that allow that to happen, is really important to civility. The times when civility breaks down the most is when people feel they are not being heard, or that they are being treated in a way that is not equitable to their peers or to the others around them. And so what can we do to make sure that we don't fall into those traps and maintain civility? Because if we're not being civil at the dais and we're not being civil with staff, the audience is seeing that, and now the public believes that incivility maybe is allowable or acceptable. So visioning and goal setting is another thing that I think is a really important element in trying to maintain this unity, even when we're not unanimous in decisions. And I'll give you an example. I worked with a really large city that had not ever done visioning and goal setting, a strategic planning session. And the instruction I was given before I worked with this very large council, who were all single member districts, and some of them not speaking to others, the instruction I was given by the city manager before I walked into the room was, don't do any damage. Oh my, what damage was I going to do? But it was because we were so scared to start talking about bigger picture issues that we were afraid that it would devolve into some more, controversial or caustic environment. But what happened was, as soon as we were able to elevate people's thoughts to a higher level than the issues that they were dealing with right here, right now, in this moment, the more consolidated that vision and those goals became. So some member might say, I think that we need a grocery store in this part of town. And another member may say, we need more manufacturing in this part of town. But if we could elevate that to economic development, and we could talk about economic development, and then we could look at how does that play out in the different districts, there was a much more unified agenda. And so that group that I wasn't trying to do any damage with, within an hour and a half, had their strategic priorities outlined and had started to work down on goals and vision. So, I think that was a case or an environment where there was a fear to go that route, as large as the city had become, because we didn't realize that there could be that combined or consolidated vision there at the top. But the higher you get people out of the weeds, the more likely they are to share their the same kinds of opinions and ideals and ultimate aspirations. So successful governments that are able to maintain that unity are those that take the time to vision. They're the ones who take the time at a retreat or every other year or at a council workshop or whatever to say, okay, what is our vision for the future of our community? What does that look like? What does that include? And what are those priorities that help get us there? What are some of the strategies, not the initiatives, not the actual tactical moves, but what is it that we're ultimately trying to achieve? And it is so common that those are very aligned, even in divided councils. So if we can get to identifying those highest level priorities, it gives us the why. It allows the council to point back to, well, this is what we're trying to achieve. It gives them the talking point, but it also gives staff the ability to say, I brought you this because if we're ultimately chasing this goal or this thing, this is where that fits into the bigger picture. Still get to make the policy decision at the council level, but it helps give that guide and it gives that framework that we can all sort of be moving toward, even if we think the moving parts at the lower levels are different. It's really still chasing those same ultimate ideals or objectives. So, and if we're not setting those goals and talking about them and telling the public, this is what we're trying to deliver to you, and this is what we think is going to move us to our next greatest, version of ourselves, then how are we setting goals and actually measuring if we're moving toward progress? If we've never written it down, much like the governance policies, then how do we know that we are actually moving in a direction and that we're making any progress? I think it's so important to take the time to do that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a business plan or this, that, or the other. But if we have the highest level vision and goals, it does give you that framework or those sort of goalposts, so that everyone, even if they're running in different patterns, they're all sort of chasing the same finish line. But ultimately, too, it's a great way to help the public see their future. So I'm working with working with a county and a city right now that have engaged the public in their strategic visioning and planning process. Really, we want to know what it is that you want. What is it that you want to tolerate? We don't need to do this in a bubble or in isolation, even though we all engage with our communities effectively, but really looking at the broader picture and the broader understanding of what the public needs or wants. One of the counties that I'm doing some strategic visioning and goal setting with right now, we did a lot of engagement with the community, and it was shocking how aligned the community's priorities were with the commissioner's priorities. High level, very high level. What do we want to be in the future? And where if you just ask the general public, what do you want? Stop growth. We don't want any more growth. But really, they wanted growth that was tolerable or manageable. And so what are the tools we can employ? They weren't completely averse to growth. It was just that they felt that the way that it was being managed wasn't tolerable to them right now. So ultimately, we got to a point where everyone is saying that we're okay with growth and we think it's good for the future of our county. It's what can we do to manage it in a way that doesn't disrupt the quality of life that we also value. Pieces and parts, not one versus the other, but one and the other. When you can engage the public in that, when you can point back to this is the vision that we have adopted, or these are the goals that we have adopted, the public has a broader understanding or can be educated more about the fact that there is a higher level or a bigger picture that's being targeted than just the right here, right now, thing that's bothering me today. Communication, the foundation of all things. The thing that it seems is the most difficult in local government and government in general. Again, I mentioned earlier the open meetings laws and open records and all of those things make people kind of scared to even try to communicate. But communication doesn't necessarily mean between council members or deliberating issues ahead of time. It's really just trying to practice communication and build communication into everything that we're doing. The more we can open it up, we used to kind of see, oh gosh, we don't want, a whole group of people to show up at the council meeting and protest whatever this thing is. But we've got to shift our thinking and think, I'd rather them be there than go out on social media after we've already adopted it and make us all look like fools. So, how do we strategically engage with the public? How do we provide opportunities for them to engage with us early and often? Sometimes they feel that they're just being brought in at the very end to check a box, and that's not necessarily building trust with the organization. But it's also communicating early and often internally. Are we taking enough time to really study issues or understand issues or have discussions or discovery about the things that we're going to be asked to decide? Are we involving all the different parties early enough in the production of the agenda item that we're going to present to council, or are there missing pieces and parts? So really it's building communication in on the front end rather than saying, okay, well, we'll tell everybody about it after it's done. That's when we have blind spots and we miss the mark in places. And then the cart kind of gets pushed out too far and we can't ever get it back. Communicating publicly and professionally. If we go back to governing standards, if we think about how communication in a meeting or communication in the work environment should be, the staff, when there's a question asked from the dais that feels controversial or it feels critical, the staff automatically thinks, oh my gosh, I'm being publicly lambasted. It just feels terrible because it's so public in the way that it's done. It's the same thing when the public goes out on social media and accuses the council person or the staffer of, you didn't do this, or, I don't like this or whatever. It's very public. It's all very public right now. And so what are the standards we want to employ internally that say, yes, we will communicate and we will listen and we will, engage. But these are the ways in which we'll do it and the ways that we will maintain that decorum that we talked about earlier. Again, governing standards can help with some of those things, but it's also cultural in the organization. It is, council, if you've got a question, we want to get you the right answer. Give me a heads up. Let me know that it's coming rather than, kind of throwing it in there. Doesn't mean council's not going to have a question, but if there's this feeling that it's always a gotcha, you're not going to get the best response and the best information from the professional that's supposed to be advising you. Communicating on occasions other than meetings. So again, when I talked about some organizations and those that seem to have better relationships and can, get through the harder times more easily, they're the ones who have the retreats or have the quarterly, off-site meeting or whatever it is to have a more casual interaction, to get the things off their chest that they need to get off their chest. But building those in as part of your system, as part of your process, rather than just when everything gets so bad that we don't know what else to do. If we can build in opportunities for there to be engagements, for the staff to kind of hear what the council's talking about with vision, or what their, biggest concerns are, or, not issues related, not specific issues related and not decision related, but really trying to have those open conversations so that people can have a better, broader understanding rather than just so specifically, adding all of their complaints and gripes onto this one particular issue. Talking about the why. If we haven't defined the why, that vision, those strategies, the governing standards, if we have never defined that, then how can we talk about it, coherently? How can we talk about it strategically? We need to be able to tie back the why. We live in a world today where everybody's trying to figure out what's the value to me. Why does this matter to me? And more broadly, you're trying to distinguish yourself as necessary to people who are just inundated with information all the time. I mean, you can see it in how many people vote. It's just so much, and they're overwhelmed, I think. So they become somewhat tuned out and or apathetic. So if we can continuously talk about the why, Why is this important? Why is city and government important? Why is it important that you participate in public hearings? Why is it that we're trying to do this thing? Why did we make this budget decision versus that budget decision? The more we can have that strategy applied up front so that we can then reference back to it, the more effective the system becomes and the more effective it looks. So the perception of the system becomes greater because it looks like we really are thinking long term and we're thinking strategically. And then finally, we have to engage our critics. They're out there. They are going to be out there. They're going to say what they want to say, whether it is at a public meeting or more frighteningly on social media or some other avenue. We can't be reactive. We can't just say, oh, okay, I'll do whatever you want. But we definitely need to hear what is being said out there, because it may be that there's a lack. We have not given enough information for the public to really understand. Or it may be that there really is a specific issue in this part of town that we hadn't considered. If we just turn off the critics and we stop listening in total, we may not make the best decision, but we also may watch the tide of opinion turn because we already have at least part of that group that is not in full support all the time of whatever it is we're trying to do. Deliberating. How often do you have an issue that crops up and we've got to decide it right now? And people's nerves get frayed, people get antagonistic toward each other, they feel forced, they're uncomfortable with the decision that was made potentially. And so to the degree possible, we need to give the maximum amount of time that we can to deliberate. It does not mean that issues should take 2 years to decide, but it does mean that people have different needs on your team. There is a different need for each member of your council or your governing body for the level of information that they feel like they need, or the level of public engagement that they feel like they need. If we are always rushing decisions, we're not doing the, sort of the workshop time ahead of time and giving the breather for people to go do look themselves or talk to their constituents, then we are setting ourselves up for people to make decisions that they walk away from uncomfortable having made. That is the worst thing you can do to an elected official, is force their hand in a way that makes them uncomfortable, because then when they're out in the public and they say, well, we had to make the so-and-so said we had to make the decision, I just had to raise my hand, or they vote no because they don't know what else to do. We really have to be more deliberative with our time and try to set up a system that's going to be the most advantageous to all. Maybe it's that we haven't had the time to have the big picture discussions about vision or, future state. And so the person is going, well, how does this play into, some other bigger, broader thing? And you feel like, oh gosh, there's, smoke and mirrors. Oftentimes it's because we haven't given the appropriate amount of time to really have the thorough discussion and to engage all the parties in a way that's going to be most fruitful. And so even if I lose the vote, I can still support that the process was done with integrity. Following the rules, I worked with a city recently who had a really, really controversial issue that made everybody just really completely up in arms. All of the council people had run to their corners. The mayor was, sort of a lone ranger out on his own, and they had an agenda item that was coming forward, which ultimately got pulled, but they decided to go ahead with the public hearing because the public had been noticed about it. And the president of that council, who was running the meeting, had sort of determined, okay, the public wants their pound of flesh and I'm going to give it to them. And so it turned into a circus of, accusations and finger pointing and talking. And it was, a couple hundred people. This went on for a few hours. And ultimately, when we discussed it, sort of did the aftermath review with them, the council and the mayor, or the council president, didn't have the standards or didn't know the standards well enough to say, we're not going to behave that way. So the angry mob got angrier and angrier. And so what that has done now is set a precedence that says it's okay to behave this way. Had they had those rules, and in hindsight, of course, it's great to be able to think about that, but we had a discussion about how we could tighten and strengthen those rules so that they could help the administrator of the council and the audience members understand these are the rules and this is how we play, and we're going to maintain decorum, but we want to hear your thoughts. So we have to follow those rules and not try to cut corners, because if we've said this is the rule and then we break the rule, then we've contradicted ourselves. But again, a lot of this work, it's, sort of, oh, we just use Robert's rules, or we use whatever this internal understanding is, without really taking the time to say this is how it should run, and then all understanding that this is our part in making sure that it runs in that way. Understanding individual needs. We do a lot of personality profiling as well when we do work with councils and with staffs, because everybody's different. So whether it's DISC or StrengthsFinder or a system we use called IOPT, or any Lumina Sparks, or any number of things, all of those are tools that help us understand what other people need. There are those who are ready to shoot from the hip whenever the issue comes up. My gut says it's good, I'm good with it, and they're ready to go. But then there are those who are much more deliberative. They need more detail. They need more understanding. They need to feel that they really have studied the issue. And if you have the shoot from the hip and the study the issue people at the same time, the shoot from the hip says you're an obstructionist, and the study the issue person says you're reckless. And so trying to figure out those dynamics is helpful as well. It helps build sort of that understanding of the other people, and that there are different needs, so that we can try to accommodate to the degree possible the needs, so everybody can reach a certain level of comfort with making a decision. So even having those sort of team dynamic understandings can be really useful in the deliberative process. It also helps staff prepare information to provide to council. If you have an entire council, and have had an entire council of 5 for the last however many years, who just want the basic information and they shoot from the hip, that's great. But you have that one new member who comes in who feels like the fix is in, or I'm expected to just follow suit, and that breaks down relationships really quickly. It also helps people not take it personally. So, being a staffer, everything felt very, very personal. We were, as staffers, playing the long game, whereas councils, they came and went. We had term limits. That's the word I was looking for. And so it was, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. It was also personal. Or if they asked a question, it always felt critical, even if it wasn't intended to be. Trying to understand people's needs, trying to understand their personalities, trying to get out of the formalized environment of a council meeting and kind of get to know each other in a different way can be really helpful in not taking it personally. When I don't understand you, and I start to infer that your motivations are something other than what I know, I'm filling in blanks, and they may or may not be right. So then these opinions that I develop over time can become pretty rooted when they weren't actually accurate to start with. So whatever we can do to start building those relationships and building those understandings ahead of time helps us not take things quite so personally. But then we also have to go back to this idea that even when we do our very, 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 very best, it's still probably going to be a 60-40 split at best of people who are pro or con. And so just understanding that's no different than on the council. The same people that are in the public are the ones who are now being elected to council. So really trying to release ourselves of taking it personally if something fails or something doesn't go right. Our leader, I love to use this quote, but our leader, Ron Holifield, who started SGR, says council has the right to do dumb. And when he says that to council, I always gasp, because I'm going, oh my gosh, what are they going to think? But honestly, they have the right. It's their right to make a decision, even if you as the staff doesn't think it's the right decision. They have the right to make a decision that is in the best interest of this group or that group versus this group or that group. And where I wouldn't necessarily advise it, if it is within their purview, they are allowed to raise their hands and vote in that way. And so if staff can start, kind of relieving themselves of taking it personally and realize that council has the right to make that decision at that level, and we are going to trust that is what they thought was the right decision in that moment, then we can potentially, kind of leave some of those personal feelings aside. But ultimately in deliberation, what we're trying to do is decide and move on, right? We don't want to keep reopening the same issues. There are some governing standards that can help you with that if you have people who keep bringing things back that have already been decided. But also, if I don't respect the process with which we arrived at the decision, I can start attacking the process in a way that allows me to have that decision reevaluated. When I start attacking the process, that attacks all decisions that are made. So what can we do to make sure that our deliberative process is so robust and so good that it is in ways impenetrable from the criticisms of whether or not it was done fairly and justly or not? And finally, reiterate the governing standards and policies, as well as vision and strategic plans. We advise that at least every time a council election happens, that those get readopted and revised if they need to be revised. If we're not living and breathing with our documents, if we're not training the new council members in their use or the new staff members in their use, then they're sitting on a shelf and they're not really of much use to anyone. But we also need to make sure it stays their document. So we want to have them raise their hand every time so that this new group that comes in, the 2 or 3 new members or whatever, can't say, well, that's the old council. We really want to say, okay, well, this is what the old council said. Do you agree, or do we need to adjust it in some way? Tying those issues to visions and goals. If we can tie the issues back to those things, we have already made part of our value proposition. We've all said this is the right direction, this is the right path, this is what we want to be someday. And so if we can tie those things back, it starts to make more sense in the grand scheme or the bigger picture. Emphasizing the process, making sure everybody understands the process and holding up the process and honoring the process, so that we don't have those sharpshooters after the fact who criticize the process and say, well, it was, you didn't do this, that, or the other, and so I don't think this decision was made in good faith. And then ultimately just constantly reminding the council, the staff, the public of the why. We are here as local government to serve your daily needs and to affect your daily life. That's what distinguishes us from the Washington, D.C.s or the state, governments. How do we demonstrate our value, and how do we demonstrate to them why what we do matters, why we need their engagement, why our processes are the way that they are, and why we think that this is what the future of our community should be. So unity is a deliberate act. It requires a commitment to process and design and adoption of process, a declaration of intent. This is who we are. This is what we believe. This is where we're going. Openness and candor, bringing in even the critics as well as the supporters. Respecting relationships inside the organization in particular, but then also with the external stakeholders. And ultimately, what you're trying to do is build a culture of civility. So all of these pieces and parts can add to this culture of civility, and it gives us the tools by which to say when, the critics show up, or the controversy erupts, or the behavior devolves. How do we bring it back to a culture of civility? It's by putting all of these things in place that give us the things to point to bring us back to center, to bring us back to what we all believe is in the greater good and the greatest interest, and to try to treat everyone with the same levels of dignity and respect and equality that they would expect in their local government. So with that, I hope you got something useful out of it. I think I went a little bit over time, and I apologize for that. But if there's still time, I'm happy to take questions. But I'm Hilary Shine, and I am with SGR, and that's my email if you wanted to get a hold of me. And Lisa, do we have any?
Thank you, Hilary. We did have one question, and I think you answered it to an extent, but I was going to go ahead and read it to you. Any advice on how to isolate 1 or 2 bad elected officials, actors who seem incapable of good group behavior? They take things personally and continue to force their opinions forward even when the group has moved on.
Yes. So The only way to do that, and I have dealt with this in many, many, many locations, is to empower the good actors. So you're not necessarily ever going to change the bad behavior. That may be who they view themselves as. They are the disruptor. That is the position or the place that they want to play. But what you can do is have the rest of the group, the majority, say, that's not how we're going to play. And so these are the rules we're going to live by and we're going to enforce and we are going to educate ourselves on so that we can stop that madness when it happens, or at least not engage it any further. But that's the part that's always the most difficult, is that the good actors often just sort of shut down because they either don't feel that they have the powers or control to stop it, or they're so uncomfortable with the dynamic that they, just sort of retreat. So empowering them with the tools that they need, it's not ever going to be effective to look to the city attorney or to the city manager and expect him to be the police. And by putting the mayor out, sort of on her own island, you have set her up to be the target of their ire. And so really it's trying to unite that good actor team to empower them to be able to police the bad actors in a way that doesn't allow them the platform and the bandwidth to sort of destroy the unity of the conversation or the civility of the environment.
And then one more, Phoebe. Yes, there will be a recording sent after this is over. And if you would like to have Hilary or any of our facilitators come out and walk through this, feel free to reach out to Hilary at her email there, or anyone at STR. You can go on our website and request a facilitator to come, and someone will definitely get it taken care of for you. We appreciate everyone joining us. We hope you'll join us next week when we have Rebecca, the president of executive recruitment, and she's going to go over some new things that we have going on there. So Hilary, thank you so much. We appreciate it, and I hope everyone has a good day.
Thank you all.